Absolutely. So I think we have everyone here. So we'll go through really quickly if people would like to just introduce themselves from the panel to the rest of the room. We're also being joined online by or Jane Roberts, I believe, is joining us. I don't know if there. So Jane, if you would like to start first, and then we'll run down the line. You can hear us?
You want me to start?
Oh, hold on. We're just getting the volume set for you.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Okay, start then with the table, and then we'll come back to Jane toward the end. So Anthony Sinclair, would you like to?
So I'm Anthony Sinclair. I'm based here at the University of Liverpool itself. I don't work on human remains, as it happens, but actually I'm interested in vocabularies of archaeology. I've completed the project looking at the history of archaeology as we can understand it through the metadata that we can extract from publications that are indexed in either the Web of Science or Scopus. I'm particularly interested in the way archaeology has grown as a discipline, because I don't think we particularly understand that very well, and how we can then begin to, I suppose, develop both histories and develop understandings of the syntheses of what has happened in the past through a sense of the vocabulary that people use. And in contrast to what you've just seen here, most of our records from the index database are very poorly curated. Because nobody has made the effort to develop controlled vocabularies or to think clearly about the way in which keywords are used, or the way in which we begin to describe coherently and consistently the patterns of archaeology itself. So in the longer term, I would like to be developing something that might actually mimic what we've seen here, but expand that more broadly towards archaeological interpretation, the scientific side of archaeology, and so forth. Human remains is really interesting from that point of view, because when I network map the terms that we can extract from the literature, human remains quite literally is central in terms of those maps. And it's central because it combines aspects of science, stratigraphy, forms of social ranking, forms of biology, forms of genetics, and all that sort of stuff. So human remains is a great place to start in terms of how we might begin to understand archaeology as a discipline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to.
Thanks. My name is Patricia Murrieta-Flores. I'm a professor in digital humanities at Lancaster University. I also don't work in human remains. I work in historical archaeology of the 16th century, particularly the conquest of Mexico by the Spanish. So very, very different topics. But one of my lines of research has been, how do we use particular technologies in order to solve questions in history and archaeology? And so most of my career has been focusing on the development of technologies coming from artificial intelligence, particularly machine learning, and other computational approaches in order to solve these kind of questions in the humanities, more specifically in historical archaeology. One of the things that I love about your project is precisely these ideas of not only thinking about how we can solve questions from a particular discipline, but also how other people that do not necessarily is engaged with these kind of questions can access information. And in that sense, I think is very important to have these examples nowadays, because we can take them not only to work with the general public, but also for archaeology itself.
Thank you. Dawn, would you like to?
Yes, I'm Dawn Archer. I'm a professor of pragmatics and corpus linguistics at the University of Manchester Metropolitan, and I'm interested. I need to say, well, there's so much work that's gone into this, and even behind it, just to do what you've achieved. So I come from it from a linguistic perspective, and I'm interested in how we can take something like this and link it to other sources. So I'm doing a project at the minute with Shakespeare, and that uses the USAS system that you've used, which is a semantic field system, looks at semantic fields and domains and themes. And one example of the crossover that we can do with something like this and something like Shakespeare, everybody knows the Yorick quote about the skull, in Hamlet, where Hamlet picks up the skull and talks about knowing Yorick well. That theme is actually involving two gravediggers. And the gravediggers are talking about whether Ophelia should get buried or not, a Christian burial, because she's committed suicide. But one of them then sings a love song while throwing out skulls as he digs the grave. So it's picking up on respect and all kinds of themes that I know that you're interested in. So us being able to link up and use a resource like this, but also link it with other things is, I think, just incredible. So well done.
No, thank you. And then do we have Jane? I'll let Jane introduce herself when she is able to join us from with sound. But just in brief, Jane is joining us as a researcher with deep experience and lots of a wealth of experience in creating digital libraries and and working with large data sets and corpora of literature and distilling that into the historical thesaurus, as well as other resources that exist both in the physical printed form as well as on a highly searchable form that involve categorization and how do we lump things together. So again, I'll let her just get into it when she can get the
Any postgraduate who went to Glasgow worked on the historical thesaurus in some capacity.
yes.
And some of us outside did as well.
Absolutely.
Slight technical issue. The technician's coming over to just fix the speaker quickly for Jane.
Okay.
So, yeah. So please carry on. He'll be in 5 minutes.
Very good. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess as it has become evident from everybody's introduction, I was hoping that we could start talking then about sort of the higher level of linguistics or the sort of larger choices we made in terms of approaching I wouldn't say a complex, but a diverse set of material, in that the library contained accounts that are supposed to be real. They're accounts that are clearly imagined and fantastical, in a lot of accounts that are perhaps a blend of the two or have been massaged between somebody's bias and opinion. And I just want to see if we could open up the floor by perhaps discussing how a resource like Hurdle that contains these sort of different texts can be used for conducting the linguistic analysis or for trying to work with other programs, either historical or for creating themes, when you have this sort of blending of real and imagined.
One of the key things to add as well is that when we were compiling the library, we emphasize we make no attempts to make any judgments on any accounts. We provide what has been reported. We think that was important. We made no judgments whatsoever.
One of the things that I found really interesting, we're working in approaches within a field called natural language processing, which is basically a subfield from computer science that is dedicated to try to understand or try to make computers understand how humans speak and write. And this is the kind of technology that brings you today Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, ChatGPT, and so on, right? And one of the big challenges that I think we have, for instance, is how these categories are defined within natural language processing. So we have, for instance, categories like name entity recognition, which means that you can ask the computer to automatically identify things like proper names, toponyms, institutions, and dates, right? And that can be seen as crossover or cultures or periods. You can, to a certain extent, define those. But when we start speaking about imaginary place and space, or when we start thinking about categories that have not been designed within a Western framework of thinking, and particularly modern, we start to have problems, right? And I think this is where vocabularies, control vocabularies can help. Also, things like,
Sorry, I think I might have just figured a way up to get Jane on. Sorry, carry on, please carry on.
I just got a bit uncanny that
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting to think about how archaeologists have gone into things like ontology, CDOC, CRM, for instance, and frameworks that help us frame how we categorize things within text.
Fantastic, thank you.
Should we try Jane?
Okay, can you hear me?
Can they hear you? Success.
Yes. Well, like Paul, I'm on the language side, but I'm particularly interested also in early English. What is and I find it very
Roger, we're getting feedback at the moment. That might not be the best option. Just give us a second. Sorry there.
Your microphone.
Hello, can you hear me? Golly, I don't know what went wrong there. Anyway, like Don, I'm on the language side. I deal with Lexis quite a lot and its history, but I'm also very interested in what texts say. Different accounts of burials happen to come in a series of texts I worked with, and I think Glenn knows them very well. And one thing that intrigues me is the way bodies keep moving around in churches. So you never quite know where they are unless you've got a record that tells you. That must be quite a worry for you all. And another thing I like about your project is the randomization, that you can get a random set of documents, because it's a bit like shelf crawling in the library instead of always using bibliographies. It gives you new ideas. So I think Hurdle is going to be a very useful tool. Hello? You may want to get the room to talk now, please.
Yeah, well, if we could just follow up and ask about the categorization, your experience working with categorization, and how that might then sort of compare, or what sort of opportunities you found in terms of creating thematic sort of clusters for the words that you analyzed for the Old English thesaurus, and how that might sort of bounce off of what we've done with Hurdle.
I suppose that's why I like the randomization, because that gives you the feel of working from bottom up with vocabulary.
Yeah.
Imposing a structure.
Well, I'm just going to throw out the question that that will annoy all linguists and all linguists hate, but in terms of categorization and bringing together language, to get the terms into a controlled vocabulary, working with controlled vocabularies, how can we easily put language into distinct boxes? The question is language more of an art or is more of a science?
Ooh, that's a good question. Can I start? And then,
Yes, no, please.
So as soon as you started talking about it, I started thinking about Z99s. How much can we not categorize? So within the USAS system that we're both using, there's a Z99 category that's for everything that we can't put into the taxonomy, and that shows you how difficult it is, and that you've got to make distinctions. Emotions have changed over time, so we think emotions is an easy category, but it might not be. So I think you have to have a way of categorizing that makes sense, that it's searchable from an archaeological perspective, but from a linguistic perspective, and allow for the fact that meaning changes over time at the same time. So I don't know how. It'd be interesting later to know how you managed that if you're using a system that was created from a modern perspective and you're using it to work backwards, because meanings do change and some words have different semantic meanings. So how do we contextualize that? And I think we have to allow for that wriggle room, and then be interested enough to go and do our own searches afterwards to say, is this capturing what I think it is? You know, where else do I need to go to learn about, but what does that actually mean for that time period?
Very much so. I mean, for the digital library itself, we have had some we did start to explore some semantic tagging within the library itself, and we're thinking what tools could we provide to assist in that sort of thing. But by far the best and simplest solution was to provide the plain text. We have run analysis, and we're doing a lot of work with on the USAS semantic tagger system, over 6,000 Z99s to manually sort through and assign values to. Another story, but that work is in progress. And I think one of the best middle ground, the happy middle ground approaches that's most useful and most valuable is to run run searches, for example, identify emotions as they appear across different time periods, across different centuries, and provide that as in a word list to say this is what we've identified, and use that so the end user can have a starting point. They can search for that and relate it to us. But so there is no.
But have something close by because meanings change.
Very much so, because we don't want to provide too much information. It's so easy to overload with data.
This is one of the things that I really love about this kind of project, right? That it provides you with the opportunity to do different kinds of approaches and techniques to linguistic analysis, to historical analysis, and to archaeological analysis, right? So from this database, I can imagine not only the fact of searching by categories and finding things, but with the emergence now of large language models and things like ChatGPT and so on, the boundaries of linguistic on the ways that we categorize things and so on can change, because you are way more free today to actually do semantic searches that are not necessarily within a specific category, but that take into account the whole context of a library, right? So I think this is a wonderful start, not only as a tool, but also as a source for many other projects to take, the 2,000 texts that you have and create, for instance, I just imagine a GPT, for instance, that speaks to medieval people. But this is a possibility, right? So it is still in an experimental phase. We need to test it, but it becomes possible because of projects like this, because you have created these categories, because you have, thought through what kind of composition a corpus must have in order to be able to answer specific questions of them.
We're not paying it, I promise.
Well, I think, apologies, Jane, we've figured out the tech. I think if we then bring that question back to you for the categorization in terms of how, I guess Hurdle's working with categorizing texts in a document, and you were working on categorizing individual words and how to group them together. Are there comparable approaches, or is there something slightly different when you're working with a text versus an individual word? And I'll put my thumb up when we've been muted.
If you're working with text, you want to know what words mean in the context within the text. And it may be very difficult to work out exactly where that word might occur in the categorization that you have developed. So the categories that are developed with words from the dictionaries reflect what is in the dictionaries. But when you go to a text, you may find something slightly different, and you have to use the categorizations as a way of finding things, but you may want to explore anew when you go to actual context. Particularly difficult is where words have what are called figurative in the dictionaries, which means we can't quite describe this. And those are quite the most difficult of all to place in a category. I found working with Old English at the beginning, Michael Samuel said, oh, well, I'm not really interested in figurative. Don't worry about that. But I did, and I did my best to keep them as far as possible. But he had quite a point about when the dictionary says figurative, beware. And that takes me to where James was working and looking at symbolizing features of civilization. And I'd love to hear what he says about that particular difficulty. Okay, over to James.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. There we go. So, as I was saying, with the USAS, with semantic tagging system, and the correction of all the Z99s, all the many thousands of them, but the most challenging category was S9, which is what's termed religion and supernatural. Originally, they were separated, but lots and lots of discussions brought them together, just because religious language is so symbolic, it's so figurative, it's so creative, suggestive, and again, that's the language of art versus science. No, you want to express things in creative new ways. sometimes, or sometimes you just want to stick with traditional forms that a function that work and operate in that manner. So that was the biggest challenge that we had to work we've had to work with. And Paul Rayson, who was the father of the USAS, even he, when we sat down over a tea several years ago, as he said, "Can we talk about S9s?" And the look on his face, he just said it all. But no, I mean, but this is the beauty of working with language, of thinking, how can we come up with creative solutions? How can we bridge these ideas and bridge expressions and bring the art and the science together? That's what it's all about at the end of the day. And it's opportunities like this digital library, like Hurdle, that allow us to explore, well, we could do it this way. This is a way of bringing together in this context, this domain, and perhaps we can start to develop, as Anthony was saying, into spread out into other domains, into other archaeological domains, and start bridging all these ideas. So I went up in a bit of tangent at the end.
So I was going to say, if we would come back on that, where are the easiest bridges to build as we go out from this? If we would see this as central, and we might want to go out into other areas, where would you start your process of making those bridges into other vocabularies?
Oh, I'm not an archaeologist, so this is very much my domain. But I do think it is the idea of of the religion, because religion bridges so many aspects of society, whether you believe in it or not. It still underpins so much of who we are, what we are, and why we are here. So I think that is probably that's probably the strongest point to start, and then work there, because it ties into so many different parts of life.
Could I come in on that?
Absolutely, yeah. I was going to extend it to both you and Patty if there were particular things that...
Because one of the things I think is exciting about this project, and I've already had a great conversation with Adam before it started, and I've got to know some of you as well, is how many opportunities there are to take something like this and look at it from different disciplinary perspectives. So I know you're doing a little bit on respect already, but that project, why not take a theme like respect and look and see how it's captured within archaeology? What's the standard approach? What's the approach for internment and all of those things? But what does that look like linguistically? How do they note respect or lack of respect in the text? And I can imagine that from a disciplinary perspective, there's an edited collection written, but I was thinking, like, the more interesting stuff is probably a podcast, taking some of this out and saying to people, do you know how people talk about religion or humanism when people are thinking about how to respectfully deal with people's bones? Do we respect what they believed culturally, historically, or not? Do they still hold a sacred element or not? Should we just put them in like museums and put them behind glass, full stop? There's so many exciting things that feed back into society and community, and I think this is what's fantastic about this project, because it is truly multidisciplinary in a way that most of us want to be but never actually achieve. So maybe we do it that way. Maybe we take a theme and see where we run with it. I don't know what you think.
Well, I think respect would be a really interesting one, because it's an area where we come into conflict, particularly where we engage with Indigenous communities and so forth. And very simply, they see that what we do, which we think of as being respectful within our own domain, is clearly not.
Yeah.
And it has to be worked out in the real world, but it has to be worked out in a way in which everyone else can see that the ways in which one chooses then to be respectful in terms of human rights are systematic and coherent and consistent, and they don't bring about other forms of disrespect. So respect is a really nice one.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that comes to my mind, and that we have spoken before with Ruth, for instance, are the ways in which different cultures approach burials or approach precisely human remains, right? I'm from Mexico, and in Mexico, eat bodies and, skeletons for dinner, in the sense that, the kind of displays, for instance, that you might have, the ways in which you approach human remains are not, I will dare to say, not necessarily, we don't have this feeling of lack of respect by approaching, for instance, our dead in ways that other cultures might think disrespectful, right? And how, for instance, the portrayal of human remains in other, and that I can see, for instance, from the texts that you have been working with, and the texts that we work, for instance, in the case of 16th century Mexico, are so different. And despite of this common idea of having, a European race of early modern history and so on, it's not, it's very local, it's not general. We have many different approaches, and I think it's very interesting to think, what is happening in different places. And this is a very good starting point to do that kind of comparison.
And take it back to the text.
Yeah.
And compare people's stories, because what you've got is people's stories, isn't it? So it's not about death, it's about life, really, and all those continuations of people's stories. So it sounds like we've got a project.
Need the money.
Jane, just because you're muted at the moment, would you like, if you'd like to jump on that, do you want to hold a thumb up? Or if you're happy to no, you're all good. Well, yeah, I also realize that we're starting to go over time. So I will take chair's privilege just to make a last parting shot that the nice thing is that having, I guess, all the modern English texts on Hurdle, but then also to give another plug for what James and Ruth were already saying, we have the medieval equivalents for those extracts, and even some extracts that have yet to be translated on GitHub. So if you want to sort of delve into these themes that you were already picking apart at a particular time, and you're actually looking to see what was said in Middle Welsh, for example, for what was the word that was used for anointing, for example, GitHub is the opportunity for that. The facility is there. But it leaves then me to say thank you once again so much for contributing to the panelists, and thank you, Jane, and apologies for the technological considerations. If people want to try and talk to Jane over the next 15 minutes, we'll have the
See me. Yeah.
come and see Ruth. James, we can type and we can get the technology working there. But without further ado, thank you so much.
Take a break for 15 minutes. Yeah, feel free to refresh, bathrooms, get some fresh air if you want, or at least a bit of a breather outside if you need to. And we're just going to reset this from the tempo.